through these next couple of weeks and into whatever the postseason looks like here in a couple of weeks, time. South Carolina is in a really good place right now with where they're projected in the latest D1 baseball projections for the field of 64, right there at a 10 seed, which is good. You have these two very important series against Georgia and against Tennessee over these next 2 weekends to put yourself in an even better spot. We know kind of that magic area is 500 in conference play, being over 500 in conference play. In South Carolina, doing that right now, 13-11 overall with 6 more games to go. And we talked about this yesterday. I feel like 500 over the next 2 weeks, which would include at least one series victory between Georgia and Tennessee, might just be enough to get you into one of those coveted top 8 seeds and being able to not only host a regional, but being positioned to host a super regional should you survive the first round there. And, with what South Carolina has been able to do over these past couple weeks, winning 3 of the last 4 series, beating great teams like Kentucky, getting a tough road series victory over Florida a couple weeks back, that they have clawed their way because they were hanging around, 14th, 15th for a couple weeks there, but they've been able to slowly claw their way up in these projections and in these standings to be in position to maybe jump into that very coveted top 8, depending on what they what they're able to do over the course of the next couple weeks. And you get Georgia at home, as we talked with Jamie Bradford earlier on in the week on the early game, and he put out a call to action. Where he encouraged everyone, hey, if you're going to be there, be loud, be rowdy, make it a hostile environment. Because it seems like Founders Park has not been up to that at points this year. We go back a couple weeks ago, and it was a conversation point we were having on here. They were talking about on the broadcast. Our guy Kip Balknight on SEC Network Plus, mentioned in that series against Arkansas that, man, for welcoming in one of the top-ranked teams in the country, everything's pretty quiet. And it just felt like there wasn't the juice in the stadium for that series as maybe you think there should have been. Seems to have improved a little bit in the week since then, but I feel like this fan base, has such a high level of expectation for what this team is supposed to be. And this has been such a weird season with Carolina, because you look at the RPI, you look at all the projections, and they're among the best teams in the country. But in a way, it kind of doesn't feel like that, because when we're watching it on a week in, week out basis, we've seen South Carolina, be close to winning so many series, but coming up short, and it just kind of feels like they're not as good as they actually are. But again, when you look at it from the 10,000-foot view, when you look at the analytics and the numbers, which are important to your postseason projections and everything, Carolina's in a great place. The SEC, obviously the toughest conference in college baseball. Carolina's 13th in the RPI with 33-15 overall record, 12-12 against quad 1 opponents, 3-1 against quad 2, 3-1 against quad 3, 15-1 against quad 4. So they are handling their business against just about everybody and splitting with, the best of the best, which isn't obviously ideal, but they've done enough to put themselves in a position to, again, have a shot at one of those coveted top 8 seeds, depending on how they handle their business over the course of these, next couple of games. And we know the talent on this team. Well, we've seen this team when it's at its best, it can compete with anyone. Sweeping Vanderbilt, taking 2 out of 3, including a run rule against Kentucky a couple weeks ago. And again, even the series losses that South Carolina's had, it's not like they're getting blown out. They weren't getting run ruled themselves or getting swept at all. You know what I mean? I know, you still lose the series, but being able to come away with one victory in every single series is still worth something and continues to add to that resume, when it's all said and done. But Carolina, again, still has all their goals in front of them, can still accomplish what it wants to accomplish, and, can hopefully still make a run at Omaha, because that's what I think the minimum expectation that a lot of people had coming into the season was based on what you did last year. Hey, you finally truly hosted a regional by being the top seed. You finally made it back to a super, and you lost to the team in 2 tight competitive games that went on to be the runner-up in the national championship. You know what I mean? Like, that's nothing to be ashamed of necessarily. But when you finally kind of get over that hump that had been holding you back for a while, everybody's expectations, I don't want to say skyrocket, but become higher. Because, okay, you've proven you can get to this point. Let's take it a step further. And I think a lot of people had their eyes on Omaha coming into the season. And again, South Carolina, outside of, Will Tippett and Eddie Copper, has been very fortunate for the most part in terms of not having a litany of injuries like they had to deal with, a season ago or in the past couple of years, where you've stayed pretty healthy. And even with, Tippett going down, the production hasn't fallen off really all that much, and you've shifted around the lineup. You put, Lee Croy at shortstop, Cassis at third base, Petrie at first base, and I feel like that's actually worked out, pretty well. So in that regard, Carolina has come away lucky for the most part this season, and hopefully that continues that way. We should be getting Will Tippett back here very, very soon, and hopefully he's in good shape to, to pick up where he left off, not only in the field, but at the plate as well. And, we'll see what Coach Kingston and his staff ultimately decide to do in terms of, shifting things around and putting pieces, where they need to be to have the most success. But, this is a talented team, a deep team, and hopefully, Carolina can make a deep run here in the postseason. But first things first, you got a very tough series against Georgia coming up tomorrow, running through Saturday. We'll dive into that contest against the Bulldogs and what they're bringing to the table and what kind of team they are coming in to Founders Park. Reminder, no homer or no grand slam last night. Bases loaded situations, unfortunately not able to drive in all those runners in one swing of the bat. So the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway elevates to $1,200. That's right, $1,200 up for grabs. Go online to 1075thegame.com and register if you haven't already for your chance to win the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. $25 added to the pot each and every game. We're getting close. I really hope we see one before the season's over. And if we do, you are going to win a whole lot of money if you are the lucky winner. So again, 1075thegame.com for the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. We'll take a look at the Georgia Bulldogs coming into Founders Park coming up tomorrow night. That's next. Extra Point Tyler head along with you here on your Wednesday on The Game. Welcome back in. Extra Point, Tyler Head along with you. I got Dimitri Ravennos going to be joining me at the bottom of the hour. Couple segments. Got some interesting thoughts on NIL and maybe the potential future of it as the landscape continues to change seemingly by the day. So we'll get into that coming up at the bottom of the hour. But a lot of baseball talk right now. D1 baseball every single week releases what they call their SEC vibes rankings, where they take all the teams, rank them 1 through 14 based on the vibes of the program and where they're currently at. South Carolina, surprisingly, went from 5 to 7 after picking up the series victory over Missouri this past weekend. And, you know, the reasoning for that, they said, was letting the Saturday game away get away from them and then clawing from behind and having to win that game late on Sunday, even though, you know, when you look at the final score, it kind of looks like a routine victory. But, of course, South Carolina had to pour on the offense over the course of those last 3 innings to make that possible. I disagree with that. I think South Carolina is still perfectly content and the vibes are good because you went on the road and won at a place that's historically not been good to you. Como's just a really, really weird place. And, you know, Jamie Bradford was telling us about, you know, it's up on a hill and it's like in a weird place on the campus and the wind's weird and there's like no fans there. And, you know, it's an odd place to play, not to mention the fact it's the longest road trip South Carolina's baseball has been on this entire season. So going in there and no matter how you win, you won. And you come out of there, and I think everybody still feels good, you know, regardless of what those wins looked like with South Carolina. But you have a daunting task ahead. Georgia comes into town, and you can't talk about the Georgia Bulldogs without talking about Charlie Condon. Everything points to him. He's legitimately probably the best player in the entire country, and his numbers back it up. Leads the nation in batting average, slugging percentage, OPS, home runs. He's homered in 7 straight games. He's on an 18-game hitting streak right now. Like, this dude is just unbelievable. Hits second in the lineup, so you're going to see him right away coming up tomorrow night and throughout the weekend. And he's probably going to hit a home run or 2. I mean, that's just part of it. You just have to assume that's going to happen. Running the numbers here based on his RBIs and all that kind of stuff, between the RBIs and the runs that he scores himself where he crosses the plate, he accounts for roughly about 2 runs per game, like on average. So you're not going to blink Georgia, more likely than not. He's going to get his runs. He's going to score his. He's going to get his. It's limiting the rest of the guys around him to hopefully come away with the series victory when it's all said and done. And again, he garners all the attention, and rightfully so, but Georgia's got plenty of confident players around him. He's not just a one-man show. The team is first in the SEC in on-base percentage and slugging percentage, you know, so they lead the conference in that regard. Corey Collins, who's their leadoff guy, is the best on-base percentage of anybody on the team, but a little bit hit or miss as of late, but did hit a 3-run homer against Vanderbilt. And he's somebody that gets a big part of getting on base is he leads the SEC in hit by pitch. And, you know, I was watching some of their game from Sunday against Vanderbilt last night, and he got just pegged to lead off the game. So, you know, he's crowds the plate a little bit. So trying to pitch him to the inside ends up leading getting hit by pitches. So that's a guy that you're going to have to do your best to keep off the bases. Slade Alford, their cleanup guy, very, very effective hitter. Has gotten hits in 15 of the last 17 games, so he's having a really, really good season so far as well. So this is a Georgia lineup that has the ability to really hurt you. And, you know, when you look at this past weekend against Missouri, thankfully the bullpen came in clutch. When it did. And, you know, the outings from Gainey and Good and guys like that saved South Carolina up there in Missouri. But if your collection of 3 starters, which we assume it's going to be Kimball and Jones and SQ once again this weekend until Kingston says otherwise, and maybe he will today. But if your collection of 3 starters, whoever they are, only end up generating 5 innings of work over the course of the weekend, you're probably not winning this series because this is a Georgia team that will open it up on you really, really quick. So you got to be more effective there. Hopefully that was just kind of a 1-week blip on the radar for all 3 of those guys against Missouri this past weekend, and they can give you a little bit more length over the course of the weekend, particularly when you talk about Kimball and Jones because, South Carolina having this TBA for their Sunday starter, has been because you don't really know how much of your bullpen you're going to use. And ideally, and Kimball's not gone super deep into games this season, but ideally, if Kimball can get you 3 or 4 innings, Ty Good can come in, give you long relief in the middle to where you're only having to use maybe 1 or 2 arms at the back end. On Friday night, Jones, on a good day, can get you 5 or 6 innings to where you're not having to expel your bullpen too much on Saturday, and then that lines you up to have a lot of options coming up on Sunday. So hopefully South Carolina can be in that position this weekend against Georgia. And speaking of pitching, looking at Georgia's pitching, they are pretty solid. Leighton Finley earned the SEC Pitcher of the Week this past weekend for his performance against Vanderbilt. Went 6 innings, giving up 3 hits, 0 runs, and 11 strikeouts on Friday. So he's the ace of the staff and certainly looks that way. He's not a stranger to bad outings, though. Had a bad one against Ole Miss a couple weeks ago, gave up 7 hits and 6 runs in just 5 innings of work. So possibility to take advantage of him coming up on Thursday night, as he is their usual Friday starter, unless they decide to kind of mix it up because the days are off a little bit. But we'll see. See what they ultimately decide to do about that. I imagine we'll get an announcement on their starting lineup sometime today or tomorrow. Charlie Goldstein, regular starter, had to leave this past Saturday against Vanderbilt. Had a tricep cramp in his arm, and his status unknown as of right now. Head coach Wes Johnson did mention they hoped he's going to be back for this series this weekend, but no, not 100% confirmed. They do have a guy in Colton Smith that's been coming out of the bullpen, and very effectively so, but did get a start a couple weeks ago against Texas A&M that they may end up sliding in to one of those weekend starts. So we'll see what Georgia ultimately ends up, deciding to do there. And I mentioned Wes Johnson a moment ago, first year as a head coach in general, and has done a really good job with Georgia. Coach Strickland was there for a long time, and was a very loved member of Georgia's coaching staff and in the Athens community. But he wasn't getting the team to Omaha. And while Georgia's not had the success in recent years that a South Carolina has had, their expectations are they should routinely be in the mix for Omaha more often than not. And Coach Strickland was not getting the job done there, so they moved on from him and now have brought in, Wes Johnson, who, again, has been around the game for a long time, been a pitching coach up to this point pretty much everywhere, been at LSU, Mississippi State, Arkansas, I believe, as well, and now gets his shot to be a head coach in the SEC and has certainly done a good job with the Bulldogs in year number 1. So we'll, see what this matchup looks like tomorrow night and through the weekend. Very excited for it. Hopefully you have a good atmosphere out there at Founders Park. And again, if you have tickets, and we haven't given away too many tickets this week, so I imagine that means the rest of the series is probably sold out, if not close to sold out. And hopefully you have a good atmosphere for the 3 games coming up this weekend. And we'll see what South Carolina can do, and hopefully put themselves in a good position going into the final week of the regular season against Tennessee next weekend. Quick reminder, the craft beer card is back. Head online to 1075thegame.com for your chance to purchase it. Just go on to the website, click on the Sweet Deals tab, and purchase the craft beer card. It's a $360 value, all yours for just $79. You can spend $30. A brewery at 12 different craft beer locations in and around the Columbia area. We'll talk to our guy, Dimitri Ravenos, coming up next. Talk a little bit NIL and maybe one idea on a future model for it. That's next is the Extra Point on your Wednesday here on The Game. I'm checking my weather app here to see when the next rain is going to be in the forecast. Unfortunately, looks like we are clear for the most part over the next couple days here in Columbia. But whenever rain does return, especially if we get one of those hard, heavy rains, you need to always be aware of standing water that might be in your crawl space. as that can create an environment for things like mold and mildew underneath your home that you certainly don't want to have sitting in your crawl space. That musty air and stuff can lead to problems with breathing, runny nose, itchy eyes, and coughs, and you don't want to have to deal with any of that. So if you have standing water under your home or any kind of foundation problems, you need to check out our friends at Canty Foundation Specialist. Go online to cantycanfixit.com, schedule an appointment, a professional will come out, evaluate your home's foundation and crawl space, and get you and your family fixed up just right. Again, Canty Foundation Specialist online at cantycanfixit.com.
Yeah, hello. I'm okay. I have to have I'm having a tooth implant today, later. So that should be fun. Looking forward to that. Yeah, hopefully.
Welcome back into the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Wednesday morning. And as he does each and every Wednesday, our guy Dimitri Urvanos checking in for a couple of segments here. As I mentioned going into the last break, we're going to talk about NIL. Dimitri, I feel like we have to come up with a new word because NIL gets talked about so much. It almost becomes redundant and one of those things that like you're sick of hearing about. So we got to come up with a better word than just NIL. You got any suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, I think player compensation, player agency, I don't know what the right word for it is, but like my complaint on it is very similar to what you're saying. It is that people that either are outright opposed to it or don't fully understand it call everything they don't like NIL. And it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, if you saw what was tweeted out about what was happening on the Senate floor yesterday here at South Carolina, I think it speaks volumes to maybe how some people don't fully grasp the concept of what NIL exactly is.
It's so weird, right? Like, I, on the one hand, understand the legal argument that, like, it's going to be really hard to tell guys they can endorse this and can't endorse that. But I thought the whole point of the NCAA, really any league, is to set its own rules. So if the NCAA says you can't endorse guns, you can't endorse alcohol, you can't endorse illegal marijuana, like, I think that's an NCAA call, not the Senate, right? Am I wrong?
No, I think you're right. But here's the thing. If the NCAA did lay out those guidelines, that would probably end up in yet another antitrust case. We're saying, all right, well, sorry, this gun shop wanted to sponsor Arkansas football, and now you're limiting these guys' NIL potential. So there goes another lawsuit.
Man, it's crazy. This is all the product of the NCAA not wanting to address the issues that it had a few years ago and letting this all be adjudicated and set up by people with special interests in this thing.
So I bring up the topic of NIL today, and you sent me this article. I thought it was pretty interesting and actually kind of ties in locally to Carolina basketball, as Carolina just got Jamari Thomas out of the transfer portal from Norfolk State. His head coach, Robert Jones, had an interesting idea for maybe a future concept as it relates to NIL, especially as we get into this, era on the horizon of players truly becoming employees with contracts and, collective bargaining and all that kind of stuff. He tweeted out, unpopular opinion, what if college players have buyouts like college coaches? Players and coaches should be able to go wherever they want, but when a coach leaves, he has to pay back a buyout clause. Well, what about if a player leaves? He pays a percentage of his new NIL deal, which, I feel like this has kind of been floated around and something that certainly could be on the horizon with this, again, new era that could be coming into effect as soon as next fall.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, my argument to that would be when the schools start paying the players, then we could talk about the players owing a percentage of their NIL deal to the school. I mean, like, this is so an example of, actually, you know what it strikes me as? It strikes me something very similar to what Brian Kelly was saying yesterday about LSU not being in the business of buying players. This strikes me as just as transparent. You could not hold on to one of your top players. And look, this we found this story on HBCU Game Day. I think most people know Norfolk State is in South Carolina State's conference, a historically black conference. Like, those schools are operating with a fraction of the budget that a South Carolina is, right? And if you are anybody in power at a school that is losing talent on any level, not just at HBCUs, but on any level, you want to find something to blame that is not, I am not doing my job well enough. I don't think that's what losing a player to the transfer portal always is, but LSU isn't in the business of buying players. Oh, what if players had to pay back a percentage of their NIL earnings before they can go anywhere? It is all trying to get the public on your side of, hey, this isn't my fault.
Well, and I can understand it from that perspective of, when you look at these mid-majors or FCS programs, they don't want to just become stepping stones to where as soon as you have somebody that, suddenly puts together a good season, well, guess what? He's going to get plucked up by a group of five or by a Power 5 school or something like that, to where you only have him for that, 1 year. I mean, you look at South Carolina State, Jawarren Howell had an amazing freshman season, and he's now on the Gamecocks roster as a running back. You know what I mean? So those kind of things will become more and more prevalent, I feel like. And I can see why, especially these smaller schools, want to have something that maybe locks these guys in a little bit more.
No, for sure. And I understand the frustration, but I would point to the NFL draft. It happened just a couple of weeks ago. The first defensive back off the board was Quinyon Mitchell, who stayed at Toledo for his entire college career. It is not impossible to keep these guys around. It is very hard, and it's 1,000 times harder than it has ever been before. I get that, but some of this stuff strikes me as coaches complaining that their job has evolved. Everybody's job changes, right?
Sure.
Nobody is doing, even if you work for the same company in the same position you were in 5 years ago, you are not doing the same job that you used to.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, things are always evolving, always changing, and coaches have long been in, the position of having all the power. I mean, it wasn't all that long ago where you could literally tell a player where they couldn't transfer.
Yep.
And it's like, hey, well, you want to leave? All right, here's 10 schools you can't go to. Nobody on our schedule in the next 5 years, whatever it may be, nobody in the conference. And those restrictions have been loosened quite a bit. And obviously NIL has put a lot of power back into the players' hands. But, and Nick Saban obviously ends up retiring and talked about his frustrations with, the current landscape of college sports. So it's a very real thing. And I think this maybe is kind of that latest example of, wanting to see a little bit more balance from their perspective in holding the players accountable in the same way.
I guess, I think the interesting thing, I'd love to hear what listeners have to say about this if you want to hit the phones or the text line. Tyler, give out that number real quick before I make my next point.
Yeah, 803-404-6100. Love Chevrolet phone lines, Firehouse Subs text line. If you have any thoughts on this, certainly let us know.
Yeah, 803-404-6100. So here is the thing that, I think is hard to square is I am very pro-player agency. I'm very pro-player empowerment when it comes to college sports. However, I recognize that the state of the transfer portal is a little bit out of control, and NIL plays a big role in that. I don't know how it is sustainable or even if it is good for these guys to have the ability to transfer every single year if they don't find the absolute right situation for them. I get that you only have X amount of time to make an impression on the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, whatever it may be. But I would imagine if by your junior year, you are not seeing yourself on that path to anything beyond being an undrafted free agent, I don't know that it is good to jump around and not build equity with any fan base where you can't find a job in town after you graduate.
Yeah, it's an interesting question to pose, and certainly there are examples of guys that maybe buried on a roster, never got an opportunity that can pop in 1 year by transferring as a junior or senior. But more often than not, if you're not playing at one school, and trying to stay on the same level at Power 5 or the SEC or whatever it may be, you're likely not going to get much more playing time at another school. So everybody, I get betting on yourself and believing that you're going to have be able to take advantage of the new opportunity. But I'd say more often than not, it doesn't always happen that way. And we forget about there are thousands of guys in the transfer portal that don't end up finding new schools. So going to the portal does not guarantee you're going to find a new home. And yes, we kind of keep our eye on the high profile guys, the 4- and 5-star guys that are the big names, but there's a ton of guys that just don't end up getting picked up and effectively in their college careers without getting another chance.
Yeah, or they end up going somewhere like a NAIA or a Division III school where you can keep playing, but you've got to pay for college now.
Yeah, and the NFL's not looking at you anymore.
Yeah, exactly. There are all sorts of personal responsibility, consequences for actions and decisions that exist that we tell kids, life comes at you fast, and then we try and put barriers in place to keep them from experiencing them. I just don't get it. I think that there certainly are things that could deter a kid from leaving a good situation at a smaller school, be it a G5 school, an HBCU, a D2, whatever, that coaches have to be a little bit more vigilant and diligent about getting those stories in front of their kids in a way that does not sound like Robert Jones, like Brian Kelly, where it just comes across as, hey, it's not my fault. You can't blame me for this.
Absolutely. We'll come back. We'll wrap up the hour number one of the Extra Point here. The SEC obviously dominates in college football this past year with Michigan winning the championship being an anomaly as opposed to the rule. Does that mean they have the best jobs, though? We'll talk about that coming up next. It is the Extra Point. He is Demetri Ravenos. Tyler Head along with you here on your Wednesday on the Game. Welcome back in. It is The Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you. Dimitri Ravanos hanging out with me for a couple minutes here. We'll get to this list of top 10 jobs in the SEC here in just a second. But as we talked about in the last segment, some thoughts and ideas being thrown out there about NIL. And we encourage you, if you had some thoughts, to weigh in on the Firehouse Subtext line or the Love Chevrolet phone lines. We actually have Sean that wants to weigh in. Sean, appreciate your call this morning. What's on your mind about NIL?
Wondering if we're just heading down a road where we are essentially having a players union for student athletes and contracts to hold them to 1 year, 2 years, 4 years, whatever it might be. Is that an option?
Appreciate your call there, Sean. I think certainly when you look at what this proposed structure that could be coming in place as soon as next fall is, there's got to be, and Dimitri, I don't know if it would necessarily be a union. I know states are a little bit, certain states have different rules with unionizing as state employees and that kind of stuff, but there has to be some kind of collective agreement with these players to be able to make them employees and be able to get the money from the NCAA and conferences and all that kind of stuff that is going to need to happen more likely than not.
Yeah, I mean, it would be like any players union in any sport, right? Like, especially when you're talking about the NCAA and you're talking about literally hundreds of different schools, each of those schools with dozens of teams. Like, you cannot be negotiating as a single player against the NCAA or even as a single team against the NCAA. I think we're on our way to players unions once employment becomes a thing. However, I do wonder if one of the pushbacks from schools, whether that's coaches, athletic directors, whatever, is not just about the players having bargaining power. They're now, if you have a 1-year contract, if you have a 2-year contract, I would guess that some of these schools are going to try and start at 2-year deals. Then you lose the ability to cut guys to improve your roster when you have the opportunity to, without having to pay some sort of buyout.
Yeah, and that's kind of the trickiness of this. And again, there's a lot of details that need to be hammered out, and I'm sure there's a lot of litigation that still needs to be figured out on this too before this ultimately gets implemented. But I imagine, can coaches talk about how chaotic the calendar is initially, just in general, but having to re-recruit your own players on a year-in-year-out basis is becoming kind of ridiculous at this point. So if they could lock guys in for more than a year and say, hey, you give me 2 years, and after that, if you want to go somewhere else, that's fine. That's up to you. But just having a little bit more reprieve in that regard, I think would certainly be a welcome thing for a lot of coaches.
Yeah, I mean, if you did 2 years, it'd be very interesting to see what the carve-outs are to protect the school, to protect the player's ability to transfer. I mean, to Robert Jones's tweet, coaches have to pay a buyout if they leave for a better job. Well, schools have to pay a buyout if the coach isn't performing up to standards and they want to move on. Just ask the people that raised the money to get Will Muschamp out of here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right on that. And I do wonder, if you potentially pose the option to sign for 3 or 4 years, depending on what school you're going to, I wonder, maybe a higher caliber talent would want to sign on for even longer, depending on who they're playing for. If you're going to a place like Georgia, that's basically an NFL factory at this point in time, saying, hey, I'm going to give myself 3 to 4 years here guaranteed, and let myself develop and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. There's a lot of options on the table. I do think it's interesting that decisions on if this is going to be implemented are coming really within the next month. Because we kind of have talked about the future of college sports as this relative thing that's kind of off in the distance, like, oh, we'll get there one day, sometime in the near future, but putting like a time stamp of, hey, this could come in as soon as fall of 2025 makes it all the more real. And it's like, no, we're almost there.
Well, what's interesting is, and I didn't think about this until you mentioned Georgia, is what would the carve-outs be if you have a 4-year deal somewhere and you're ready to jump after your 3rd year? Or what would the language be if you have a 4-year deal and you redshirted your 1st year? Like, I wonder all the nitpicky details of these contracts and how they're going to be written to allow college sports to operate in a way, or at least as close to a way with the power brokers are familiar with as possible. And here's the other thing too, like, this is going to kill college basketball. If we did this, it would absolutely destroy college basketball because all the NBA has to do is eliminate that 19-year-old age minimum, which they seem to be leaning towards. And then if you are a top prospect, why would you sign anything that could keep you beyond a year away from the NBA?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's slide in one more call here. Corbin wants to weigh in real quick. I got a couple minutes here. Corbin, what's on your mind?
Hey, guys. Just a quick thought I've had, and I can see the positives and negatives from both sides, but the way I think about NIL that would make a lot of sense is use more of like a real-life example. So, like, out in the world, like, you can have two jobs. Like, you might have a teacher that during the summer they're a server or a bartender. That's just a small example, but if you set these players up on a base salary concept, and that base salary could be adjustable and negotiable per player, and I understand that would involve a players union, which I'm kind of torn on, but if you had a system set up like that, these guys would and females would still be able to go out and do things on the side and have endorsement deals or have side work that they do to earn extra money. But to have that base salary in play, I just don't see why that's not really something that's discussed a little bit more. I mean, I know it's an idea that's been tossed around, but that's kind of where I sit on it.
And appreciate the call there, Corbin. And we've got about a minute here, but I do think that is likely how it'll end up being structured, where you have whatever you make from your school as an employee, but you still have the opportunity to go out there and have an endorsement or still be able to make money off of what we now know is traditional NIL. If you're a superstar player, you can still go make $1 million in NIL while making, I don't know, $100,000 as your base salary from the school or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I love Corbin's idea. I think that's the way it should operate, but you are talking about a whole new economic model because the base salary is going to have to come from the school. If it comes from anyone else, it's not a salary, and there is nothing the NCAA can do to govern it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's ever evolving, and I'm sure we'll have a different thought or different idea on this when next week rolls around. Appreciate it as always, Dimitri. We'll catch up with you next week.
Yeah, absolutely, Tyler. Thanks, buddy. All
right, 1 hour down, another hour to go. We'll hear from Jared Brown, what he had to say about Gamecock quarterbacks yesterday when he was with us on the Garnet Trust Tower. Coming up next on the Extra Point here on the Game. 10 o'clock. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you. Hour number 2 here on the game. Appreciate our guy, Dimitri Venos, checking in as he always does for a couple segments on Wednesday. And appreciate you guys that wanted to weigh in there on the Left Chevrolet phone lines, 803-404-6100 on the NIL discussion. As look, it's going to keep going. It's going to keep evolving. There's going to be something new that pops off about this, in the next couple of days or the next week that we're going to be talking about, then to our guy Mitt Winter, who I had on the other day. He's a great follow on Twitter at Winter Sports Law. If you don't follow him, literally every single day he is going deep on the latest with NIL because there's always something new popping up there. So again, we'll have more to talk about that very soon, I'm sure. I mentioned this going into that last segment of the hour, and we didn't get a chance to talk about it because we took some of your phone calls there, and I never want to break my cardinal rule of not paying off a tease. But Brad Crawford of 24/7 Sports, who of course reports locally here on South Carolina, had an interesting article yesterday or 2 days ago, that he put up in regards to the best jobs in college football. And no surprise, the title of the article on 24/7 is ranking college football's 10 best jobs in 2024 and beyond. And this isn't from the standpoint of saying the 10 best jobs available. It's the 10 best jobs in general. So if you're a coach at one of these schools, you're in a good place, good position for not only success right now, but success going forward in the future. And there's no surprise that the SEC dominates this list. And again, this is the opinion of Brad Crawford, so you may have a different opinion, but we're just kind of going off of what Brad's idea here is. No surprise, Georgia's at the top of the list. Multiple national championships in the past couple of years. They've got a wealth of, NIL resources out there. They've become an NFL factory, like I said a moment ago. So Kirby Smart is sitting in a good position for years to come. Down the list, Texas comes in at number 2. See our first non-SEC team in Ohio State at number 3, LSU at number 4. Brian Kelly, even though he's not in the business of buying players. Alabama at number 5 with Kalen DeBoer entering his first year. Oregon at 6. Oklahoma at 7, another SEC team now that they've joined the conference. Florida State at 8. Michigan at 9, and wrapping up the top 10 is Texas A&M, who of course has a wealth of resources when it comes to NIL, and Mike Elko going into his first year there as head coach. And again, Dimitri and I were going to get into this, but he didn't have time to at the end of that last hour. But I wanted to kind of introduce what we were going to discuss with this, where you have 6 SEC teams in the theoretical top 10 of the best jobs in college football. And if we expand this list out to 15 or 20 or something like that, guess what? You're going to see a lot more SEC teams in there. And now you're talking about a 16-team conference with Texas and Oklahoma joining the fray. And the question, I think it's a fair question to ask, is because the SEC obviously is a destination conference. Regardless of where you go, if you're in the SEC as a head coach, you're doing something right. And you're in a good position. You're obviously getting a lot of payout from the new college football playoff contracts and TV dollars and all that kind of stuff. So no matter what school you are in the SEC, you're doing good from a financial standpoint. But at what point do we ever get to where just being in the SEC isn't good enough? You know what I mean? Where you need to be in one of these top tier jobs to ever have hopes of being successful. You know what I mean? Especially now, as we were talking about in the last hour, where the landscape of the sport is changing, where you're having players become employees, and it's up to the schools themselves to determine if they want to pay up to that supposed salary cap of rumored to be $22 million, where I would assume most SEC schools can foot that bill, but maybe not. I don't know. Is Vanderbilt going to do that? Now they're private, so their money's a little bit different. Mississippi State, Arkansas, I'm sure they will fight tooth and nail to find that money somewhere. But what if they can't? Do those jobs suddenly become undesirable because now, despite the fact that you're in the SEC, you're nowhere near the upper echelon of what this conference is because you don't have the resources to compete anymore? I don't know. It's an interesting question to pose. And again, this is just Brad Crawford's opinion of what the top 10 jobs in college football are. But I think if you asked a lot of important people around the sport, columnists, coaches, whatever it may be, you're probably going to see some of the same names pop up, some of the same schools pop up as far as what the best jobs are. And again, this isn't based on jobs that are open right now. It's based on what you have in the job. Now, again, Kirby Smart's probably going to coach at Georgia for the next 20 years at least, or something along those lines. He's not going anywhere anytime soon, but he's at the best job right now, and the results are showing on the field. And guess what? They're going to be favored to win the national championship this year, more likely than not. So it's an interesting question. And as we go further and further into whatever this new future in college football is going to be, how does that gap continue to grow? Is South Carolina at risk of falling into being stuck in a bottom tier of the SEC? I don't know. Now we have belief that South Carolina is going to be able to afford to be a part of that upper echelon of teams that can afford this new salary cap. Is that enough? Is just being able to pay your players the same as Georgia and Alabama and Texas and all that kind of stuff going to be enough? I don't know. And that's a question that we're not going to have answered until we get into it, until we start living that reality of the new era of college football. So it was an interesting thought. And again, Dimitri and I were going to dive into that in the last hour. Didn't have time, but wanted to pay that off so you weren't guessing in terms of what we wanted to discuss there. Yesterday, Jared Brown, new transfer wide receiver from Coastal Carolina, sat in here with myself and Chris Clark on the Garnet Trust Hour, and great conversation. If you haven't listened to it, you can go back and listen to it on our podcasting page as well as the 107.5, on the Game TV. You can watch the replay there as well. But given the news of the day yesterday, with Illinois Sellers being named the starting quarterback coming out of the spring, we asked Jared Brown his thoughts and assessment of what he's seen from the quarterbacks through spring practice from his eyes. And here's what he had to say.
What stands out about me is that, Lenoris is a younger guy, but, his plays, like he's had about 3 years of experience. He knows the playbook. He knows where everyone's supposed to be. A great guy on and off the field, so I'm not mad at it at all. And Robbie's a great player too, and that's somebody that you have to look out for when he is running the ball too, because he's definitely a playmaker with the ball in his hand. But both of those guys are great players. They know where everyone's supposed to be. They're in the playbook. I'll step in the facility for something not even football related, and I'll see them coming out the film room. Watching film. Trying to perfect their craft. And every time I'm out there in practice, I tell them what I see, and they tell me what they see, and we'll just go off of that.
And again, that's the perspective of a player that's working with these guys every single day at every practice and all this kind of stuff. So good insight there. I do think what he said about Robbie Ashford was telling of what we know about Robbie Ashford coming in here, where, of course, his struggle at Auburn was being able to throw the ball. And Jared Brown said, man, you got to watch out for him when he runs, but that's only roughly half the job of playing quarterback in what this offense is going to be. You also got to be able to throw the ball. And from what the small sample size we saw in the spring game, which, again, very vanilla, but still, you could see that Robbie Ashford was still struggling a bit when it comes to throwing the football, as opposed to Illinois Sellers, who's a little bit more refined. We've seen his big arm on display a couple of times already, even in the games that he got into last year here for South Carolina. So, again, this was the news of the day yesterday, that Lenore Sellers was named the starter coming out of spring, and you have to put that caveat on it because that's what Beamer said, where, hey, it's still an open competition. There's still a chance, one of these guys could pop up over the course of the summer or fall camp and maybe take the reins from him. But if I'm a betting man, and I've said this many times, I am not, I would feel pretty safe betting that Lenore Sellers is getting that first snap when the first game rolls around against Old Dominion on August 31st. Now, that being said, if he plays terrible, if he throws 4 interceptions and fumbles 3 times against Old Dominion, there's a good chance somebody else might be starting against Kentucky the next week. But that is a different conversation to have. We're focusing on who is that day one starter when the season begins. And then we'll focus on what happens when you're actually playing the game. But we can only go off of what we see in practice and what we hear from coaches and the little media availability that we get up to this point to determine who that starter is going to be. And again, all signs right now point to Lenore Sellers not losing that job anytime soon. He's athletic. He's already been ingrained in the system for a year. The model of this offense is being built around his skill set, which, that's what Dow Loggins did a season ago for Spencer Rattler. And now you have a quarterback that offers a different skill set, can still throw the ball like Spencer Rattler can. Maybe not make all the throws Spencer Rattler can, but has a good enough arm. But the running game is going to become a big part of it. Now, I do think it's important that you brought in a guy in Robbie Ashford that has a similar skill set in being able to run the ball. So, again, knock on wood, this doesn't happen if Sellers went down. If Sellers lost his helmet for a play and had to come out or something like that, you insert a quarterback that's not playing a dynamically different style than what Lenore Sellers is. And Robbie Ashford knew it was going to be a tough challenge coming in here to compete with a guy that was already established, to compete with a guy that seemed to be the heir apparent to the quarterback throne once Spencer Rattler left. And Ashford was straightforward saying, hey, you know what? I didn't get the development I wanted at Auburn. I hoped I can come here and get that development. Where he is at that stage, we don't know. It sounds like he's made improvements. Again, we only got to see the small sample size in the spring game, so you can't gauge a ton of that from the limited amount of access that we saw to him. But his throwing didn't look that much better. Now, what happens over the course of the summer and the fall, we don't know. Could he make leaps and bounds? Sure. But I think even that probably isn't enough to unseat Lenore Sellers before the season gets here. Now, again, Sellers plays bad. Well, then they'll go to option number 2 or 3 or whatever it may end up being. But until Lenore Sellers proves, in my opinion, on the field that he should not be the starting quarterback, he's going to be the starting quarterback. And I think that kind of puts a bow on the battle, to me, until the season actually starts, to actually see him in action in games. It would be pretty shocking news if something changed at starting quarterback between now and when the season starts at the end of August. And that brings up a pretty interesting conversation because with Sellers theoretically being named the starter for the fall at this point, that kind of put a bow on quarterback conversations in the offseason in the SEC, because I think we might have our solidified list of 16 starting quarterbacks in the SEC already buttoned up. We'll dive into that coming up. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on this Wednesday here on The Game. Welcome back into the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you. Reminder, coming up Sunday, it is Mother's Day. If you're slacking on a Mother's Day gift, it's all good. 107.5 The Game has got your chance to send mom to Atlanta's Evergreen Lakeside Resort with a family 4-pack of passes to Stone Mountain Park just outside of Atlanta. Go online to the 107.5 The Game Facebook page. This is on the Facebook page now to qualify for your chance to win. So give mom a nice little weekend getaway at Atlanta's Evergreen Lakeside Resort out there at Stone Mountain Park. Again, just outside of Atlanta. Again, the news yesterday of Sellers being named the starting quarterback coming away from spring was big here, obviously locally, as we finally got the confirmation of what we all assumed to have been true the entire time. But it also meant for the SEC that maybe one of the last few quarterback questions in the offseason might have actually gotten answered. Connor O'Gara of Saturday Down South put up an article yesterday, and it's entitled, "It's a bit strange and probably good that there's so few quarterback battles going on in the SEC." As when you kind of look at the full slate of now 16 teams with Texas and Oklahoma joining the fray, there's really not a whole lot of controversy across the league in terms of who's going to be starting quarterbacks at what schools going into the fall, compared to a season ago where perhaps the most high-profile quarterback battle in the entire country was happening at Alabama, where you had Tyler Buckner and Jalen Milroe and Ty Simpson and all those guys in the mix to be the starters at the beginning of the season, and to the point where even in going into the second or third game of the year, they still hadn't figured it out, which was so rare for a Nick Saban team, where in years past, it was, all right, well, we got to decide between Tua and Jalen Hurts, two high-caliber five-star level guys. Oh, it's a 1A and 1B. To where last year they couldn't figure it out for a couple weeks. Obviously, Jalen Milroe ended up sliding in and ended up having a perfectly fine season that helped lead Alabama to the college football playoff once again before losing to Michigan in the Rose Bowl. But, that controversy is not there this year. Jalen Milroe is going to be the starter for Alabama when the fall rolls around. Graham Mertz returning at Florida for another year. Carson Beck, obviously at Georgia. Vandegrift going up to Kentucky. He's going to be the starter. Garrett Nussmeier taking over for Jaden Daniels at LSU. Brady Cook returning for another year at Missouri. Jackson Arnold elevated to the starter now that Dylan Gabriel's gone off to Oregon from Oklahoma. Jackson Dart returns for another year. Nico Imalavea getting a chance to start after getting the bowl game start at Tennessee this past year. Quinn Ewers, who's going to be a Heisman favorite going into this season. Connor Wegman returning from injury. Like all these jobs are pretty much buttoned up for the most part, which again is kind of a rare thing in the SEC. I think maybe the biggest question or what could potentially be a battle is up in Vanderbilt at between Diego Pavea, the transfer from New Mexico State, and Nate Johnson, the transfer over from Utah. Maybe, but it seems to be at this point in time coming out of the spring that Diego Pavea has got the nod, at least as of right now. And maybe that could change between now and when the season starts, but it may be a situation like with Sellers where until they show you they can't do it on the field, then you're going to stick with what you got. So I don't know. It's a weird place to be. And I'm sure there have been previous years where there's been no real controversy across the board, with quarterback play in the SEC, but it's fewer and far between because there's usually at least a couple of jobs that still seem up for grabs up until kind of the 11th hour when the season starts. But as of right now, that is not the case. And South Carolina kind of being one of the latest ones to decide on that. And again, we don't see that really changing anytime between now and when the season starts. Does that mean we're for a great elite season of SEC play, of SEC quarterback play? Maybe. It certainly feels like in the past couple of years, the overall quarterback play of the league has dipped a little bit. Now again, you have, especially in college where you're losing guys every 4 to 5 years, you're going to have lulls and you're going to have periods where the quarterback play is not as elite as it, once was. I mean, when you look at it, where did the best quarterbacks in this year's draft come from? Well, they came from Southern Cal. They came from North Carolina. They came from Oregon. They came from Washington. For the most part, it was guys outside the SEC. I mean, Rattler obviously went to the, to the Saints in the 5th round, but it wasn't this like elite year of SEC quarterback play as far as pro potential certainly seemed. Now, with a lot of these guys coming back and having another year of seasoning under their belt, does that mean it's going to elevate even more? We'll see. As you have a lot of guys that are projected to go very high. Of course, Jaden Daniels did end up going number 2 overall in the draft, won the Heisman Trophy. But outside of that, it wasn't across the board as high a level of quarterback play as what it's been in years past. But looking at next year's draft projections, you have several quarterbacks in the SEC that are projected to be in that mix of being top 5 quarterbacks being taken off the board. In Carson Beck, in Quinn Ewers, even Jalen Milroe is projected to possibly go pretty high in terms of quarterbacks. Jackson Dart has got a lot of pro potential. So we could be maybe seeing I don't want to say a renaissance, but an elevation of quarterback play across the board in the SEC in 2025. Now, when all those guys move on, does that mean we're going back into another lull? Who knows? It's tough. It's tough to predict. And again, college sports have such a huge turnover on a every couple of year basis because you only have so many years of eligibility. These kind of things happen. But we could be setting the table for potentially a great year of a quarterback play across the league. And you're going to have a lot of quarterbacks like Beck, like Ewers, even Milroe as well. They're going to be high on people's Heisman watch list as the season goes along, to where we could see another SEC quarterback maybe taking home the Heisman Trophy when it's all said and done. But, this past year across the board, it wasn't the best for quarterback play in the SEC compared to years past, and we will see if things get elevated back to a higher degree for this upcoming season. It is race week at Darlington Raceway, throwback weekend up there this weekend. Goodyear 400 coming up on Sunday, but we had quite a barn burner of a race this past Sunday at the Kansas Speedway. Jen Jensen will join me on the other side to talk about it as we do each and every Wednesday and look ahead to Darlington. That's coming up next. It is the Extra Point. It's our head with you here on The Game.
Here comes Truex. They're going to close right to the 2 leaders. Coming to the line. Crash together. I believe Buscher. I think
it's so close. This is going to be a huge win for Buscher. They're excited. I think it's him, Kevin.
That was incredible.
Corey Heim gets spun just past the checkered flag with, I think, Austin Dillon.
Oh, yeah.
Let's look at it. It may be the 5.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Sourhead along with you here on the game. That was the call on Sunday night on Fox Sports 1. And it was indeed the 5. Kyle Larson literally almost tying with Chris Buscher at the finish line there at the Kansas Speedway. But Larson ends up getting the win by about 3 inches, the closest finish in NASCAR history. Jen Jensen joined me as she does each and every Wednesday. Talk a little bit of racing. Jen, I've been a race fan for a long time. That legitimately, from green flag to checkered flag, might be one of the best races I've ever seen.
Was it not? I mean, there was just so much good racing, you know, the abilities to pass. It was a high-quality race, and I'm not going to lie, since I did have the winning pick for the picks contest in the morning show, I'm telling you, it was an even better race by the time we determine the winner.
Anybody but Bill.
Anybody but Bill. Got that right.
I watching it on Sunday, and look, I'm a big Larson fan. I was initially disappointed that he didn't win, but I was excited for the finish nonetheless because I thought watching it in real time that, okay, yeah, the 17 won. And even watching the replay coming to the line, I mean, just ever so slightly, Kyle Larson's ahead of him. But I really thought that the 17 team had won their first race of the year. Ford had finally gotten their first win for the first time this year across all 3 national series. But unfortunately, they walk away from Kansas heartbroken.
Yeah, and I was really hopeful for them because, again, it would have been a great win. You know, Buscher, I think, is a good driver, a good guy. RFK, I would love to see them get a win this year, and Ford needed a win desperately. So the fact that it was that close, and it was interesting that the feelings obviously were hurt online because you saw RFK put up there basically the picture of the 2 cars by the line, by the painted line, and they said, we're just going to leave this here. But again, not really taking the time. They were just upset because obviously it's not the painted line where they're actually using that as the marker for the finish.
Yeah, the painted line is more ceremonial than anything else. And, you know, they have people, you can go out there and you can, sign it before the race and that kind of stuff. And they repaint it over the course of the weekend because, burnouts and spinouts and all that kind of stuff. So it's just there for show more than anything else. But NASCAR has an official process with an electronic line that does determine the winner. A lot of high-speed cameras that did show the results of Kyle Larson coming across the line first. Close finishes are one of those things that we've been fortunate to see multiple times this year. You had the Atlanta finish with Daniel Suarez, the crazy finish in the Xfinity race at Texas a couple weeks back, but it's something that we could go years without seeing. So it's one of those things that as a racing fan, you really got to appreciate it because you never really know when it's going to happen again, and it's so cool, especially, with the way they were racing on Sunday and getting a green and white checker finish, you knew it was very possible, and being able to just sit back and enjoy those last couple laps was really, really fun.
Yep, and you just wonder, is the car starting to allow, or are they figuring things out with the cars so they're able to make them more competitive and more and racier, or what is it that is changing? Or is it, of course, granted, your intermediate tracks obviously I think these cars really kind of run the best on them, but again, you have had other good finishes that isn't necessarily an intermediate.
It's funny you mentioned that because if we went back, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, and if you would have told someone, hey, we're going to be advocating for more intermediate tracks and less short tracks, they would look to you like you are absolutely crazy. But as we know with this next-gen car, it races great on these 1.5 to 2 mile types of tracks. They could put on a show like we did on Sunday. Unfortunately, the short tracks have suffered. But, I mean, I agree with Kyle Larson. Give me more intermediates. That's where the racing's good right now.
Yep, 100%. And it was kind of fun because I was trying to keep an eye on the Fords a little bit because, again, there's just a lot going on with all of that. To see 3 Fords in the top 10, it's like, okay, are the 1.5 miles, the intermediates, is that where they're going to shine, or where are they in their development with this dark horse Mustang?
Yeah, and again, they've yet to win in anything this year, Xfinity Series, Truck Series, and, when you kind of look at it, they've been on the raw end of all three of those close finishes. Blaney was right there at the end of the Atlanta race. Ryan Sieg was right there at the end of the Xfinity race, and obviously Chris Buescher on Sunday night. They're going to break through and win eventually, but they've, come literally inches away from winning multiple times this year.
Yep, I'm 100%. And again, for the brand, I sure hope that they get that win here pretty soon. But now it's just kind of a fun storyline to keep following until they get across the finish line.
For Kyle Larson, the month of May is huge for him. Going to be doing the double here in a couple weeks between running the Indy 500 and the Coke 600. Very excited for that. Going to be going into Darlington this weekend, a track that he won the Southern 500 at last season. But what a way to kick off the month of May for him, where a lot of eyes in the entire motorsports world are going to be upon him to kick it off with a win like that on Sunday.
It is going to be an exciting month for him. The hashtag 1100 Hendrick, because Hendrick is part of the sponsorship for his IndyCar, and it is going to be a fun month for him. It's going to be interesting as he's trying to qualify for the Indy 500. You're going to have Kevin Harvick potentially stepping into his car for the All-Star race. But so I think he's in pretty good hands in that respect. But he has a busy month ahead of him, and a lot of, not that he doesn't drive a lot, because you look at his schedule, everything that he drives on the weekends, short tracks, dirt tracks, you name it. The man is behind the wheel of something all the time.
Well, and that's why, and again, I'm a big Larson fan in general, but I agree with a lot of people that I think he's the best driver in the world because he can hop in anything and go fast and win. And, am I expecting him to go out there and win the Indy 500? No, not necessarily, because, that is a new discipline to him. But if he went out there and ran top 10 and got rookie of the race, I'm not going to be surprised by it.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's going to be a fun Indy 500 for sure, because then you have Elio going number 5 to win that. But this is one time that I'm especially excited to be going to the 500, because I'm just so anxious to see in person, how he does.
Well, before we get to the 500, a lot of excitement this weekend as we head to Darlington for Throwback Weekend at the track that's too tough to tame. But keeping an eye on the weather. It's going to be absolutely beautiful all weekend long. So you're going to have some great racing Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday with the Goodyear 400. And this is a track that a season ago, and I was at both the Cup races last year, we got treated to 2 really good races. You had William Byron winning in the spring, and then you had Kyle Larson getting the Southern 500 victory in the playoffs last fall. And those are going to be 2 guys right there in the mix once again who are obviously having 2 really, really strong seasons so far.
Yep, it is a very interesting track in its layout and in preparing the cars. And I was listening to Todd Gordon the other day. He'd previously been a crew chief, and he had mentioned how you just can't set up the car for Darlington. Like, you do the best you can, but then it's kind of up to the drivers at that point to make it work for them, because there are just so many unique aspects to that track.
Well, and that's what I've always loved about Darlington, even before I moved out here and started to have the ability to go to the track, is that no matter what generation of car, no matter what the rules package is, Darlington's always put on a good show, because it is truly a driver's track. It's very worn out, very abrasive. It eats up tires. You have the ability to run multiple lanes there as well. Like, it's truly a track that is just, I don't want to say, a perfect necessarily, but pretty close to perfect in the ability for it to produce good racing no matter what.
Yep, and it'll be interesting to see how the tires wear at this track. Last year I can remember seeing a lot of focus on the tires and stuff. But again, the abrasiveness of the track impacts the tires. So the compound that they're working right now, how is that going to work as far as this coming weekend? It's going to be fun. It's not going to be super hot. It's looking like maybe around 80 degrees. So it should be interesting to see how the racing is.
Well, as excited as I am for the racing, I'm just as excited for the throwbacks as it is Throwback Weekend, the funnest weekend of the NASCAR year. We see a lot of tributes and throwbacks to so many various schemes. Larson, as we mentioned a moment ago, going to be running the 90s cornflake scheme from Terry Labonte. William Byron running Gordon's old Firestorm. You're going to have Bowman throwing back to Jimmy Johnson. Chase Elliott going to be thrown back to Dale Jr.'s most recent Daytona 500 win. Hendrick Motorsports going to get a lot of money out of me this weekend with the throwback stuff, but I just love what this weekend has turned into and all the great schemes that we're going to see on track this weekend.
Oh my gosh! And across the board, again, they do it with all the series, so the trucks and the Xfinity series. There was a Hot Wheels. Kyle Petty did back in the late '90s, and that's just such a fun scheme. So I'm looking forward to seeing that on the track. I think Brendan Poole's the one who's going to be running that. But Classic Busch Light you're going to see out there, and it's just so much fun for them to revisit all these different paint schemes. Some have a more emotional connection than others. The Rodney Childers throwback scheme for his driver's car. Josh Berry is going to be running that, and we saw that on display at the governor's mansion, where he didn't even know that they were doing that scheme for him. So he was like taken aback, because that was when he had ran the modifieds, that was the scheme that he had. So there's, I think, a lot of sentimental things that go into a lot of these different throwbacks.
So we've been doing Throwback Weekend for almost a decade now, going back to 2015 when the Southern 500 returned to Labor Day weekend. Do you have one throwback over the years that definitively stands out above the rest to you?
There are just so many, and I'm probably one that'll go with more of the goofy stuff, like, the Oscar Mayer that Mark Martin ran. I just sometimes I think it's kind of, they can have some fun with some brands, but there's the classic like black and gold that Dale Senior ran. With the Bass Pro scheme, and I think that Austin Dillon's running that scheme, and I think that's very iconic. I can see a lot of different die casts in that particular one, so I think that one kind of stands out. How about you?
It's really tough to beat what Kyle Larson did in the first year with the Mellow Yellow scheme, throwing it back to Kyle Petty from the 90s. Like, they got that perfect. Like, that really set the bar for me, and there have been some good ones over the years, but that one's truly hard to beat in my eyes.
I agree, and I was kind of looking at some of the schemes in the Xfinity series, and they're actually going to run one. I think a driver, Ryan Ellis, I'm not that as familiar with him, but they're actually doing that neon green and yellow, like Cole Trickle from Days of Thunder, and I think that's hysterical, but that's awesome. How fun is that going to be to see on the track?
No, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. It's a great weekend to pay tribute to NASCAR's past, while also looking ahead to the future, and this year's theme is grassroots, which kind of goes in line with what you were talking about with Rodney Childers and his former late model scheme. So excited to see Josh Berry running that, and Jen, excited for all of us to be out at the track coming up on Friday.
I know. I'm so excited. I can't wait. Going there tomorrow to get us all set up, so we're free to go on Friday morning.
Are you going to ride in the Goodyear Blimp again this time?
I am not doing that this year, but that was pretty exciting last year. If I get another opportunity, though, I'll probably share one with somebody.
You can't pass that up for sure.
No.
we'll have plenty more to talk about as the week goes along, getting you set for Throwback Weekend. And Jen Jensen joining me. She always does each and every Wednesday. Appreciate it as always, Jen.
Thanks, Tyler.
Come back and wrap up today's edition of The Extra Point. What's the best team name in all of sports? One of those is coming to Colonial Life Arena this weekend. Tell you about that coming up next. It is The Extra Point. It's Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point here on the game. Tyler Head along with you. Appreciate Jen Jensen as always. As I mentioned, we're going to be out at Darlington coming up on Friday. The early game and the Extra Point going to be broadcasting live out there, sponsored by our friends over at Schroeder's Towing. Going to be out there from 6 a.m. until noon on Friday. Certainly looking forward to that. Coming up this weekend, the Las Vegas Aces coming into town to take on the Puerto Rican national team at Colonial Life Arena Saturday at 1 o'clock. Keep listening all day long right here on the game for your chance to win some tickets to go and see that. Asia Wilson obviously making her return to Colonial Life Arena with her WNBA team. And I said this yesterday. I love the name Las Vegas Aces. I legitimately think it is one of the best names in all of sports because it fits perfectly to what the city is and what we know the identity of Las Vegas to be. And it's short, sweet, to the point, flows perfectly. I love the name. And it got me thinking last night, what are truly the best names in sports? Like, I didn't want to create a top 5 list. I just wanted to kind of throw out a couple names off the top of my head that really kind of stuck out because it's really hard. There are plenty of good names in sports, but to ascend to that next level of being great or phenomenal, that's very tough. I think the Aces are certainly in that great category. What might be truly the best name in sports, though, in my opinion, Seattle Kraken. The NHL team out of Seattle started up just a couple years ago. I think Kraken is just next level. When you can invoke like mythical creatures like that, dragons, that kind of stuff, it's really cool. And I think Seattle, from a marketing standpoint alone, knocked it out of the park with Seattle Kraken. Obviously it's next to the ocean. It makes a lot of sense, and works perfectly for them. The only other team name in sports that I feel like can really crack into that upper echelon of it's got to be the Las Vegas Raiders, right? Which formerly the Oakland Raiders, formerly Los Angeles Raiders, now in Las Vegas. But there's such an aura around that team and around the Raiders that, like, it's perfect, right? Their fan base is known to be a little more of, gritty and edgy. The black and silver combination that they've never strayed away from. The black hole when they were, I guess they have the black hole in Las Vegas now, but when they were in Oakland, certainly the black hole and kind of what that stood for. I don't know. It just fits perfectly to me. And again, there's a lot of good team names out there that kind of fit the mold of what the team is in the city and are very good and unique. But man, those are the 3 that kind of stick out to me as like that upper echelon of like these names are truly phenomenal. I got a couple of you guys waiting in on the Firehouse Subs text line. Great team names here. Nameless texter weighs in and says, Phil weighs in and says, my favorite college team name is Long Beach State, the Dirtbags. I didn't know that Long Beach had changed their name. So a couple years ago, they were the 49ers, I believe, and they changed that name. Now they are, or at least for the baseball team, the Dirtbags. That's really good because obviously, relates to baseball and all that kind of stuff. I like that a lot. That's very like minor league baseball to me. So that's really good. If we want to get weird with mascots, and I wouldn't say this is a great name, but it's definitely a unique one. The Boll Weevil of the University of Arkansas Monticello is perhaps the most unique name in all of college sports. What is it? You also have UC Santa Barbara with the bananas, or no, Santa Cruz, UC Santa Cruz with the bananas with the banana slugs. That's a good one too. You can get very creative with team names. Like, you don't have to be the Eagles or, the Tigers or that kind of stuff. That stuff gets very generic and boring to me. So I appreciate when teams think outside the box. And again, every minor league baseball team knocks it out of the park more often than not with the kind of team names they come up with. The Toledo Mud Hens, the Rocket City Trash Pandas, the list goes on and on. Tons of great ones out there. The old Hartford Whalers of hockey was a great name that unfortunately is no longer around anymore. More of you guys weighing in. To actually 2 of you weighing in with the exact same thing, Jason and Nameless Texter. Wichita State Shockers. That's a cool one too. that really stands out, very unique, like the little logo that they have there. And obviously a program that's had good success over the years when it comes to college basketball. Can't forget about the Presbyterian Blue Hose. Nameless Texture weighs in on that, a very unique one there. Let's see, let's get one more in here before we get out of here. Oh, got a long list. Denver might have the best names across the board. This is from Kennedy. Broncos, Rockies, Avalanche, Nuggets, Rapid, and Mammoth. Mammoth are in lacrosse. I do like Rockies. Rockies was also one that almost crossed into my list of like the upper echelon of team names. So a lot of great ones out there. Appreciate you guys weighing in on the Firehouse Subs text line 803-404-6100. That'll do it for today's edition of the Extra Point. Coming up next, it is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Myself, Wes, and Chris here on the game. Welcome in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. Wes, very excited. Banging on the table.
Got my caffeine.
Okay. All right. Wired up and ready to go.
Ready to roll.
You actually got in here early, too.
Just hanging out with Chris.
Talking shop.
Solving the world's problems.
Well, Chris has been here since like 8 a.m.
Yeah, probably.
I was getting a little extra
like,
work.
all right.
Show prep.
There
I was
you go.
prepping for the show for that long.
Sure you were.
Tyler's got his brand new TC equipment rental hat on.
That's right.
Sharp.
Over there, Old Dunbar Road, West Columbia. Go by and see him.
There you go. Put you up in the scissor lift.
Up
I'm
high.
afraid of heights. Not for me.
It's okay.
Well, if you would have been up there, you may have been struck by Ethan Petrie's home run he hit last night. If you were up that high.
Yeah. What that one about? How about halfway up the light pole? I think.
I didn't see it, but anytime you start talking about light towers and home runs, that's a good sign, unless you're the pitcher.
Here's the thing. Does any of Ethan Petrie's home runs surprise us anymore?
No.
Dude's hit him about every single. If he would have hit it over that enormous batter's eye that they have up there in Rock Hill, that wouldn't have shocked me.
The sun delay.
Good. That thing was enormous.
You know, it's the biggest batter's eye in the country, I hear.
That's what they said on the broadcast, which I think was just the Winthrop radio broadcast.
That's what they said on the Gamecock broadcast, too. So
Okay.
somebody is saying that. I don't know if it's like they went out and measured them all, but the way that is, I'll say this, guys. That's something I love about baseball.
Sure.
There's always just these weird little quirks for different ballparks and different things that happen. And apparently the way they situated the stadium looks directly into the sun at about 7:15 in May.
So that's actually when I was playing in high school, I was an outfielder. I would always go on Google Maps before playing in a different venue to see where the sun was going to be in reference to our stadium, because if I needed to wear my glasses or not.
Wow.
You didn't want to lose the ball in the sun. You never did that?
That's next level.
No. Really?
Because
that's like some next level film prep.
Because at our field, the sun would come up behind home plate, and in a late afternoon game, it's right there above you. So I wanted to get a reference for these other stadiums. Some of them, it'd be at your back, didn't have to worry about it. And other ones, it's right there in your face. Got to wear your sunglasses.
I'm not surprised.
I thought other people did that. Am I the only one?
You were finding that edge. I mean, you know who would be very proud right now is Demetrius Knight Jr.
Okay.
He would be. He's a film review guy. Oh yeah, you weren't in here for Demetrius. He's definitely a film review guy, so he would be very proud.
Not surprised that Tyler, he's a planner. Wes and I are like, "Where's the stadium at? Like, what time do we have to be there?" We don't know.
Yeah, it's impressive, Tyler.
Did you get on the field and like do the grass blades like to see where the wind was going?
Occasionally, I'd kick up a few just to see.
Did you wear a lot of eye black?
Sometimes.
Okay.
I had those like glasses that you flip down to. So
No, you didn't. No, you
Nice.
didn't. I love it. I love it. Speaking of Petrie home runs, though, guys. Yeah. So did you see this one? Were you watching?
Yeah, I was watching.
Was it farther than the one he hit to center in Missouri?
Oh, that's a good question.
I feel like the one in Missouri was a tank.
I feel like the one in Missouri probably
that
went
was
farther.
An absolute tank. You know what my favorite thing about baseball? One of my favorite things is when the ball is off the bat, and you haven't seen the view of where the ball is actually going yet.
Yeah.
If your brain can tell if that's smashed or that's a pop up, and when he hit the one in Missouri, my brain was like, that is gone.
Yeah, it's one of those ones where the outfielders don't even turn and try and play on it.
Well, my man hit
gone.
the fence. He was ticked. Like he drifted back and then he got to the fence and he just hit the wall.
Smacked the fence.
He smacked the wall because he knew that. I mean, it hit that tree back behind right center. Petrie's probably got some of the best natural pure power of anybody we've ever seen come through that program. And the funny thing is, I feel like there's a perception that he's had a little bit, I don't want to say sophomore slump, that he's had a little bit of a down year compared to last year. But if you look at the stats, it's not the case. He's had to deal with teams pitching him differently. I think we saw that maybe the latter part of last year as well. Teams just realized, hey, we're not going to let him be the guy that beats us. So he's had to be more selective, and that can be frustrating when you're trying to obviously put a team on your back. But his numbers are was that 19th home run of the year, I think?
I believe so.
It was.
Yes.
So,
well, yeah, because he the last weekend against Kentucky would have had his 15th, but it got taken away because he ran past whoever was ahead of him on the base path.
Brindley.
That was scored as a single, they said?
It was a single with an unassisted out at first base.
Unassisted out, yeah. That's a weird scoring. No, he has hit some tanks. You're right, Wes. And I feel like, I don't know, that ball was flying out yesterday. Yeah. Like Cassis hit one, he's
getting going too.
Yeah. And then that Petrie homer was in the sandwich between Brindling hitting one and then Mesita hitting one that ended up being the last run of the game and route to the run rule. So and then Jones had one earlier in the game. That was a 2-run homer. That was actually Brindling's first home run of the year. But yeah, ball was flying out of the park last night. And as we're getting into these 80, 85 degree days, that's when the ball really starts flying. And hopefully that continues to trend for South Carolina as we go through these next couple of series.
Yeah, that's a good point, Tyler. And I think that actually, in my opinion, was a really good win yesterday. Like, you look at the record, this is not a great Winthrop team this year. Like, they're really not. I mean, growing up, like, I remember Winthrop being a proud baseball program. They just have not been as good this year. But as we know, when you get into the midweeks and you're going up there to Rock Hill and you've got a big SEC series, quick turnaround, baseball can humble you sometimes, and you can get yourself in a 4-3 ball game on a Tuesday night. I thought the way, they gave up a couple runs early, but just kind of kept pouring on, and you didn't really have to feel like you had to put much leverage on your pitching staff. And Mark Kingston was asked about it in the pregame, basically like, you have to change your approach in this game in terms of managing your staff, knowing Thursday, quick turnaround, and huge series. And I appreciated his response. It wasn't the coach speak. It was, look, we're going to try to win today, but SEC will always take precedent. So their plan was to use a bunch of guys, but use them either frankly, maybe guys that aren't going to be used this weekend, or if it is a guy that's going to be used this weekend, use them for a small enough stretch that they're going to be available. And so, I think to just get a big lead, not have to go to your quote-unquote main guys as this game progressed, I think that's how you would want it to play out going into what has quickly become, at least to this point, the biggest series of the season so far.
Yeah, and Pitzer got the start last night, threw 40 pitches. That was the most out of anybody. Kept everybody's pitch count pretty low. Didn't have to tax anybody too much. So you're going to have your full complement of guys going into the series this weekend. And obviously a lot of offensive production last night as well. And, again, losing to Winthrop wouldn't have really dinged you in your overall perception of the RPI or anything like that, or your projections for the postseason. But if anything else keeps the momentum going, and it wrapped up almost a perfect midweek slate for South Carolina, the one loss they had coming to Georgia Southern a couple weeks ago. And, I think that speaks volumes to kind of the depth of this team and, the ability to put in a good staff of guys on Tuesday nights and, continue on with your good offense in those midweeks that, again, at the end of the day, aren't as important as what you do on the weekends in conference play, but are good to win more often than not. And South Carolina almost had all of them this year.
That's pretty rare, too. I feel like to only kind of have the one slip up there was really good. And obviously, I guess you had the 2 losses to Clemson. Then there was one out of conference where you took 2 out of 3 early on. I think for them, those are the games does it kill you to lose one? Of course not. But it just would have been a big damper, I feel like, to lose to Winthrop yesterday, a team that, again, is not that great this year. Going into this big series, you really needed, frankly, like if they had lost, I would be sitting here saying, you just have to flush it and move on.
Sure.
But you really needed to, I think, continue the momentum from Sunday, and that's exactly what they did. They'll feel good going into Thursday. And just, I think when you start looking at how tight some of these resumes are gonna be, every win you can get, SEC or not, to stack this overall record, especially when you start looking at how many great teams you've played. Your strength of schedule is really good. South Carolina currently 13th in the RPI, and there's going to be a lot of conversation down the stretch about who deserves to be kind of these final few host sites. How many SEC teams is the committee willing to put in there? I saw, by the way, I heard you talking earlier, Tyler. So D1 baseball moved South Carolina back on their Vibes
Yes,
watch.
from 5 to 7. That was weird.
Laughable,
Yeah.
I feel like.
Well, and the reasoning was, you let Saturday get away from you and you had to claw your way back on Sunday. But I was like, I don't think that's...
You get penalized for
I
coming
don't think
from
should be
behind?
penalized, especially at a place that historically has not been good to South Carolina, playing out there in Como. And it's a weird place to play. It's a long road trip. And regardless how you won the games, you came out of there with a series win, which is obviously the most important thing.
Their last, I think, 5 trips out there, basically they won one game out of every 3.
Yeah.
And Missouri actually had a winning record in SEC play at home.
Mm-hmm.
So as bad as they are,
sure,
they've held serve at home, and then even now they don't now. They would be 500 now. I think they were 5-4 going into that series. So if I don't know that for D1 baseball, who covers this thing as close and as well as anybody,
sure,
that's a little bit surprising to me that they would ding South Carolina, knowing these are baseball guys. Like baseball people know,
right?
Every given weekend, you can easily lose on the road. So that's a little bit surprising to me. I think it does tell you a little bit about just how tight the SEC teams are in terms of being jumbled up in the middle and in terms of you're looking for any little thing to separate one school from another. Our guys at On 3, they're doing their own sort of, much like they did with bracketology, they're doing their own projections for the tournament this year as well. I was a little bit shocked, frankly, to see after a series win, they don't have South Carolina hosting right now. And they moved Mississippi State up into that final spot. So South Carolina went from 11th as a regional host in On 3's projections to just outside of that, which you won an SEC series. It's kind of, I don't know, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But the good thing is you're sitting right there against 2 great opponents coming up. Georgia, where did Georgia come from?
Yeah.
They're 5th in the RPI.
That's crazy.
Well, Tennessee 8th.
Are we in the territory kind of like we were last basketball season before South Carolina finally started getting their due, where it's like, okay, when are you going to be ranked? Because we're sitting here talking about how, okay, yeah, South Carolina, it's not like they're, maybe a top 5 team right now, but they have done enough to where maybe they should not be slipping in a vibes check,
Sure.
Like they've done enough. I feel like you're in kind of that territory that you were with the basketball team of, hey, you've done enough. Maybe not everybody's noticed, but keep winning and it'll come, it'll happen. That's probably where they are with these last 2 SEC series.
Well, the funny thing is, I feel like for much of the year, we were at the opposite of where we were in basketball. And it was that Gamecock fans were like, this team's not that great.
Yeah, they're just not that
and
good.
D1 baseball still had them in the top 25.
That's
it was
true.
like, people were saying, that's not a top 25 team. It's like, have you looked at the teams that are playing?
Yes.
I mean, this has been, like, I kind of feel like, y'all remember last year, obviously, South Carolina kind of went through a stretch at the end where there was a big lull after starting out incredibly well. They had injuries, and they battled their way through this just horrendously difficult SEC schedule. They got a host seed, and then they rolled through that regional. And it's when you have to play the teams you play in this conference, it gets you ready for postseason play. And then, but of course, they get matched up with another SEC at Florida for the Super. I wouldn't be shocked, especially if South Carolina can get that regional host, regardless of who they play.
Mm-hmm.
I think this team could roll right through a regional again when you're talking about going out of conference.
Absolutely. And we'll continue to dive into that matchup for tomorrow night against Georgia, the Thursday through Saturday series here over the next couple days. Coming up next, though, I want to revisit a little of the conversation we had with Jared Brown yesterday in the Garner Trust Hour. Talked about a couple things that I wanted to pick back out and go back over as the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs rolls on your Wednesday here on the game.
All right, I want to tell you about the limited time sub that is back at Firehouse Subs, and you can get it at any of the 14 Midlands locations. All throughout the Midlands, there's a Firehouse Subs close to you wherever you may be. You can go to firehousesubs.com or use the Firehouse Subs app to not only earn rewards on your purchases, you can order lunch, dinner, catering, and earn rewards towards future purchases. You can also use their zip code locator to find the closest location next to you. Check out the barbecue Cuban sub, back for a limited time only, slow smoked pulled pork, honey ham, melted Swiss, the golden mustard barbecue sauce, chipotle slaw, and spicy pickle chips, all on a toasted sub roll as Southern Roots with a Cuban twist. Try it today at Firehouse Subs. They make their subs differently because their subs can make a difference every day. Firehousesubs.com or the Firehouse Subs app.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark along with you. We'll get to some thoughts from Jared Brown on the Garnet Trust Hour from yesterday in just a moment, but we were talking about baseball in that last segment. Huge series, of course, coming up tomorrow night, taking on Georgia Thursday through Saturday. Our guy Josh has informed us we have a couple of tickets for tomorrow night's game.
Joshua coming through.
Late first pitch, 8 o'clock. tomorrow night at Founders Park. 2 pairs. Callers right now, 4 and 5. 803-404-6100. Win yourself a pair of tickets to a huge, huge series at Founders Park between the Gamecocks and the Bulldogs. Dave, before you answer those phone lines, if you could give us cut number 3 here. This is Jared Brown yesterday talking about making some improvements on his route running through spring practice.
Something in particular that I want to get better at is really route running.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I want to. You know, I came here to be a complete receiver, and have production on this team consistently. You know, so I feel like the way that I can make the better step in that direction is to clean up my route running. That's really one thing that I need to work on. Like at Coastal, you know, we were in a triple option offense, so I really wasn't running routes like that. And then when they left, and then we came back, and then when the new staff came in with Coach Beck, you know, I was a slot receiver then, so I really wasn't having to run those real routes, the whole route tree. So one thing that I'm going to really harp on this summer is the route tree and the mental aspect of the game.
And as you mentioned there, sorry about that. As you mentioned there at Coastal, it's not something he had to do a lot of from a refined standpoint. So that's an area that he's obviously wanting to improve on here at South Carolina. And when you look at somebody that has the ability to line up in so many different areas like he did at Coastal, improving on that route running, get a little bit more refined with that, can elevate his game to a much, much higher level if he's able to do that this offseason.
I think that's something that working with Mike Furry, who has obviously the background coaching in the NFL at the receiver position, and then, of course, playing in the NFL at the receiver position and having to be a technician, you would say, at that spot. I think that can go a long way with a guy. Like, I don't think we can overstate how important that could be for Jared Brown. And that's something that this staff has talked about quite a bit in terms of since Beamer got here is putting the receivers in a position to run route trees that they're going to run in the NFL and preparing them for that next level. And I was even listening to some of the Panthers press conference stuff after they drafted Leggett, and that was part of their discussion was, look, we talked to Dow Loggins. We know this was an NFL-style scheme, and that was something that we liked about Leggett and his skill set or his development, you would even say, so far. So I think it's kind of fascinating. Chris, I don't know if y'all talked about this much past what Jared just said, but you can read between the lines here. He did play a ton of slot or just where they're literally motioning him into the backfield and handing him the ball. Or Coastal does all types of fascinating stuff with their offense, but it is decidedly not pro style. Like it would, at least before this past year, it would be the opposite of pro style, I think. So there probably is a little bit of a learning curve there. From what we saw when we were out there, it looked to me like Jared Brown was playing more of one of those outside receiver spots. And I think he was probably in the Z spot, I believe you'd call it in this offense. And so for him, that's an entirely sort of new ask in terms of what they're asking him to do, which I think means, yes, there's a learning curve, but also if he has a great offseason, Chris, what we heard and saw from him in the spring, there's probably still some upside to go here for once he gets comfortable doing what they're asking him to do.
Yeah, and he did address that a little bit about playing outside versus inside. Like you said, at Coastal, he was exclusively a slot receiver, whether he lined up there or they're motioning him into the backfield. And here, as we saw throughout the spring and in the spring game, you know, you look out and Gage Larvidan's playing inside as a slot guy, and Gage played inside and outside at Miami, has seemed to find a little bit more of a home as a slot here at South Carolina. Jared's played outside, and so you're right, that is an adjustment, and Jared talked about that some a little bit yesterday and just said, hey, you know, normally you're in the slot, you're used to free access. You know, you don't get a guy lined up over you all the time, some of the time maybe, depending on the defensive scheme, but when they handed him the ball, which, you know, he had 15, 20 carries a year at Coastal, they bring him in on jet sweeps, so you're getting a head start. You've got free access out of the backfield typically, or you're lined up in the slot, and they do some different things with him there, short routes, let him run wheels, things like that. Now you line up, and it was kind of funny. He said, O.D. Fortune, like you got O.D. Fortune across from you, Emery Floyd, Vicari Swain, Judge. And that's been another part of his growth. The interesting thing about Jared is he's had multiple offensive coordinators in college. He's had multiple receivers coaches. And so he just kind of rolls with those things. And it seems like he's been a pretty versatile guy who's just kind of rolled with those punches. It will be a little different for him this year. And I think, you remember at the beginning of preseason or spring camp, we heard probably more about Gage at the beginning. Towards the end, you started hearing a little bit more about Jared Brown. In the last couple scrimmages, he had the play that was highlighted on Gamecock football social media from one of the scrimmages. I think he started coming along, and I think you chalk that up to not just playing in a new offense, but really just playing a different role than you've played in the past as well.
Yeah, and mentioning him having to deal with so many different offensive coordinators when he was at Coastal, I brought up the question to him yesterday where, since he's been here, he's essentially had 3 different wide receivers coaches before eventually settling on Mike Fury, a couple of months ago, and he seemed completely unfazed by that. Like that wasn't even that big of a deal because, again, he's kind of dealt with that up to this point in his career. But I think we're all excited about what he's going to bring to the table and have that versatility, having that skill set of being, what he claims to be one of the fastest guys on the team in his opinion, and how Dow Loggins is going to be able to utilize him in this offense this fall.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a discussion we have throughout the offseason, kind of leading into the preseason, then, of course, leading into the season, is how does this receiving core shake out? And I think here's how I framed it up on Gamecock Central. I think there are still lots of questions about the receiving core, but I think South Carolina and Jared Brown's a big part of this, but there are several other guys who are part of this as well. South Carolina has given itself many potential answers. And so that's a lot better than having questions and feeling like you don't really have the answers, or you're having to just sort of move a guy there, or you're kind of making it up out of thin air. I think adding these transfer guys, adding Mazio Bennett as a high school guy, Vandrevius Jacobs, to me, he's sort of the equivalent of getting a late ad as a high school guy because he's still young. He's a redshirt freshman, still has 4 years of eligibility left. Delvon Campbell is more like an NFL team adding a late free agent, I think, and being a guy who you expect to come in and play a lot. So there are still going to be discussions. The great thing about it is if you're Jared Brown, you go into this offseason, you should have all the motivation in the world because there's plenty of playing time and plenty of passes available if you can have a great offseason and go get it and do the things you need to do. And, guys, something that might be lost in all this a little bit, I don't think I realized this at first. I should have, but obviously the portal is like a blur. Jared Brown, unlike some of these other guys, he's got 2 years of eligibility left. So if he wants to get his feet under him this year and be a big part of this offense, be a big part of this scheme, he actually could set himself up very well to be one of the top guys, not just this year, but taken into another level his second year, if that's what he wants.
If you missed any of that conversation yesterday, you can find it on our podcasting page as well as the full replay on the Game TV as well from the Garnet Trust Hour yesterday with Jared Brown. Coming up next, I'm going to let you guys put on your construction hats. We're going to make some renovations to Willie B in the surrounding areas. That's next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the Game.
I'm going to tell you how to hit a grand slam with your roof. Hit up our friends at Classic Roofing, classicroofingsc.com. Chris is laughing at me right now. That's okay. 803-590-7870, classicroofingsc.com. Go on there right now. Click the free estimate button. You might be saying, why do I need to get a free estimate for my roof? Everything seems fine. Well, as you know, if you own a home, your roof is like literally one of the most important pieces of that home. Also, you want to make sure that you are protected because you want to know when that big, potentially really big charge as far as that roof could be in your future. So they're going to come out, they're going to give you this free estimate. They're going to let you know, hey, here are a couple little problem areas that you might want to go ahead and address now to extend the life of that roof. Also, they're going to give you that peace of mind to know exactly how much life is left on your roof so that you can go ahead and prepare for a future big charge as well. Classic Roofing, classicroofingsc.com, 803-590-7870.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, West, and Chris along with you here on the game post-game show today. Going to be broadcasting live from Beer Keller at 600 Canal Side Street from 3 until 6. Go by and see Jay and Elijah out there. This tweet kind of went viral yesterday with Gamecock Twitter. This is from Gamecocks Today. It's a fan account. They asked the question, imagine you are chosen as the lead manager to develop the next series of renovations at Willie B. What is the first change that you would make to the stadium or the surrounding area? So you have free reign to do whatever you want to Willie B or the surrounding area. What would you guys choose to do?
Yeah, and should we ask people to hit us on the text line?
Yeah, if you have an idea, text line 803-404-6100. What would you change? Would you tear the whole thing down and start over again? Would you add, I don't know, Wi-Fi? Some people are asking for that. Ice in the troughs is another popular thing, apparently. That seems kind of, I don't think you have to be on the renovation squad to make that happen, but
yeah,
a lot of ideas.
Shout out to my guy Gamecocks today. That's my dude. I won't say his real name. I won't out him. I don't know if that's
got to stay anonymous.
I don't know if that's supposed to be out there or not, but
Docs.
My guy is very good at what he does. He does a lot of
my guy redacted.
Does a lot of work for us on Gamecock Central as well. And so, yeah, you were talking about this before we got out of the break there, Tyler. Lots of realistic options there that people have said, but I think that does speak a little bit to, hey, you got to do everything you can. I think South Carolina's been trying to do this. You got to do everything you can to make that fan experience good enough that somebody wants to get off their couch and their 65-inch TV and their beer fridge and want to just come out and sit in the sun and watch football for 5 hours, basically, and sit through the red hat guy and all that, commercials and breaks in the game and stuff like that. So if I'm South Carolina, I'm reading these responses, honestly. What do fans want? And Wi-Fi actually is a huge ask for fans because they want to be able to check other games. They want to be able to check their bets, frankly. Mm-hmm. And they want to be able to, if there's another game. I watched somebody near me at a game last year watch the entire, who was it? Did Notre Dame and Ohio State play last year?
Yes, that was when Ryan Day yelled at Lou Holtz.
Yeah. Somebody watched the entire game beside me.
Where's Lou Holtz?
So I think those things are valid. I think the big thing for South Carolina, a lot of people talk about wanting to sort of close in the north end zone. Mm-hmm. And I don't think in today, like 15 years ago, that was really on the docket. Like you always heard that was maybe going to be a future part of the plans. These days, stadiums are getting smaller. Now there's been talk, of course, about the feasibility studies out there of can you add stuff around the stadium that could potentially provide some revenue to then turn around and beef up the stadium. So my answer would be, I think the best thing for Williams-Brice, best thing for the fans, could you eventually take out all the bleachers, go lower level, chairbacks, and then sort of close in the north end zone as well to make it, like you're going to lose a lot of seats if you go chairbacks in west, east, and south lower. Students can still have bleachers because they're going to just pack in there anyway. But then add basically, like connect the west and the east, like to the edges of the north, which is the student section, if y'all stick with me here. And then eventually maybe put some type of upper deck on the north side that would not make up for all the seats you lost by getting rid of the bleachers and going to chairback, but would even it out a little bit so that you're not Vandy.
Had to throw in the Vandy there. I go to, and I don't know, are y'all going to make fun of me if you're like, you picked every single thing, but like, no, I have 4 or 5 things in my mind.
If you have free reign, go for it.
And I'm just going off the ones that I hear the most from fans, but also some practical things. I actually like, and I know a lot of people have mentioned chairbacks and things like that. I'm going to kind of go away from that. I think one thing I've heard a lot, and this is both for revenue and some fans who have the means to do it would be interested, more suites, either upgrading the suites that are in existence or providing even more seating area. Now, you're removing seats from the stadium. You're not going to have, they've already done that. So you might be going to 70-something thousand, whatever, but more suites, more premium seating. I think bathrooms are always a hot button issue. Sometimes you get to the games, and to a degree this happens at a lot of places, but you can't even move on the concourse at certain points of a game in certain areas. It gets very congested. Can you find it? And I'm not an engineer. Solve that. Bathrooms, I think concessions could definitely be streamlined. Maybe even have better pricing models. The Atlanta Falcons in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, they went to that with a lot of success from what I've seen.
They're kind of the standard when people talk about sports concessions now.
I think if you saw, and then even adding in Wi-Fi. So again, those are not, that's not how comfortable is your seat, unless you're in the premium seating, then it's very comfortable. But I just think adding some things to, if you're going to pay all the money to go to the game and spend the time and sit out in the hot, having some things where when you leave the game, you weren't like, man, I couldn't even walk on the concourse, or I just paid $12 for a hot dog, or whatever it may be.
So doesn't go into the fan experience. Do they have a recruiting suite at Willie B as of right now?
They do.
Yeah.
Is it like a newer one, or is it one that could be renovated?
Basically, my understanding is that the old weight room kind of is now, I guess I haven't been in there, but they do have an area where they host the recruits that I think became a thing once they built the ops building, basically.
Okay, because I know when Georgia did their West End Zone project a couple years ago, a big portion of that was this new revamped recruiting suite, which, you know,
You can always upgrade
is that going to be the
stuff.
sole reason why somebody comes to your school? It's not, but giving them the best possible experience can go a long way. So I didn't know what South Carolina's looks like at this point in time.
I want to know what Chris has against chairbacks.
They just, no, I mean, hey, I love a chair back, especially now. Like, I'll go to a high school game
Bit of
now.
lumbar
and be like,
support?
yeah. I mean, you need some support. Like, those bleachers, those are rough. But they're just not as high on my priority list.
Are you the guy that brings the individual seat back yourself?
No, but I'm going to start too.
Yeah,
I'm
you're gonna be that
this
guy.
year. Yeah.
I feel like they're, like, you could, that north, to me, the north end zone is your playground for, again, that's the student section end, for some really cool stuff you could do, building like around where the video board is or up above the video board, where you could potentially, like Chris is talking about, add some suites to that side, get creative with it. You know, you see some schools, I think you see this in baseball too, sort of the almost ground level suites and stuff. Maybe there's some things you could do in that area where currently the two sides do not match up. They don't connect with the north end zone.
A lot of y'all weighing in on the Firehouse Subs text line. We'll get to some of those thoughts as we wrap up today's edition of the show. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Wednesday on the game.
And spending some time talking about upgrades to Williams-Brice Stadium, and some of those included some audio-visual stuff and some Wi-Fi, guys. That's a popular one. Well, if you want to upgrade your Wi-Fi at your home or your business, reach out to our friends Michael and Nathan at Integrated Media, and they can help you do that. You know, when you get to Williams-Brice on game day, and if the Wi-Fi is a little spotty, that can be irritating, and that's frankly out of your hands. But if it's happening at your home, if you've got dead spots, if you've got some outdoor seating area, a screen porch, even just a dead spot somewhere in the corners of your home, they can help address that for you. IntegratedMediaInc.com or 803-948-8327, whether it's Wi-Fi, whether it's wireless speakers, home theater, security and cameras, TV installations, they can handle all of it for you. Check them out. Again, IntegratedMediaInc.com to get a better sense of their services, or 803-948-8327.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyrod, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you. Reminder, once again, the 107.5 The Game, Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway rolls on to another game. Had bases loaded last night. No Grand Slam. $1,200 up for grabs tomorrow night, taking on Georgia. Go online to 1075thegame.com. Register for your chance to win. It's got to happen at some point. I really hope so. We got a lot of money to give away.
I already called my shot, and it didn't happen, so I can't do it again.
Well, whenever it does happen, it's going to be a big deal. Hopefully this weekend against Georgia, a lot of money up for grabs. Again, go online to 1075thegame.com, register for your chance to win. A lot of you waiting on the Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100, on ideas of what you would do to Willie B in the
What's the
surrounding
best
areas.
one we got?
I'm just going to run through a couple of ones that we have here. Monty also wants to close in the upper bowl. So, again, kind of doing something around the scoreboard, maybe over it, kind of, closing off that end of the stadium. Let's see here. Chris says, want to put in individual fold-down chairs. Yes, you lose some capacity, but that would create exclusivity. Mike wants to put large TVs by the concession stand because you are waiting in line for a while.
That's very doable, I think.
JB just wants replays of reviews on the scoreboard. Think that's...
Did they not do that?
I thought they did, but maybe not.
I feel like they do.
If not, that's a easy fix. And then, let's see, this is a long one here, but nameless texter wants the parking situation to be better.
Put your name on it, texter. I feel like the parking... Go to some of the other SEC stadiums. Try to drive in and out of Clemson on a game day. Like, the parking, I feel like, is pretty good.
With one, I will give a caveat, and this is something my lovely wife, surprised she hadn't texted in.
She's probably listening.
I'm surprised she hadn't called or texted in with this one. So the pedestrian bridge.
That one came up a lot on Twitter.
That is one. And I remember I had a source at the Department of Transportation.
Reliable one?
Semi. Worked for Department of Transportation at the time. And I don't want to speak out of turn. It was something about how it was difficult to do. A lot of red tape, like everything else.
Sure.
But if you think about it, if you put a pedestrian bridge across, the crazy intersection there, right where like Carolina Walk is and all that stuff.
Bluff George Rogers
Bluff
Boulevard.
George Rogers. If you had a pedestrian bridge from the stadium to cross that road, I mean, that would alleviate some traffic for sure. And I don't mean just foot traffic. I mean literally cars, because a lot of them are just waiting on people to cross the road.
Well, leaving the game, going down Bluff Road, I mean, you're sitting there for 20, 30 minutes just letting people cross because it's just hordes of people crossing, one at a time, it seems like.
A pedestrian bridge or two.
That would alleviate
That would go a long way. You know what else? And this is something I don't know if people think about, but there's that little spot on Bluff Road right after you exit the stadium, you go left, you're walking, you're in the parking lot, and then you haven't gotten to a sidewalk yet, and you literally have to walk in the road if you're on the stadium side of Bluff Road. Mm-hmm. That's a dangerous, I don't want to sound like
very.
That is a dangerous spot because people, they've had a few, drinks, and maybe the people driving have too, and it's like, to me, that's a spot because there's a brick wall right there that is right up against the road. Mm-hmm. I'm surprised that spot hasn't been fixed already. To me, that would be something, and I'm sure there's privately owned land there or something too. To me, that probably needs to be fixed. Here, to me, I don't know if this is feasible at all. You want to get outside the box on this thing? There needs to be some type of owning to create some shade for those early September games in Williams-Brice Stadium. Like the upper deck in September, you are roasting up there. And how many people have literally had to, the Dr. Number 8 come to because of dehydration and passing out up there. If there was some way, I've heard soccer stadiums do this overseas, that some type of way to create some artificial shade up there. I don't think we can. I don't think there's any way to pump some AC up there, like a big old fan. But the closest thing might be some type of shade.
So, and I was thinking about this Baylor's McLean Stadium, which is a newer stadium. They kind of have this extended awning at the top of their upper deck that doesn't cover everybody, but at least provides a little bit of shade. So maybe something along those lines, kind of like under the lights, maybe, that would at least alleviate a little bit of that roasting sun through, September.
Yeah, that's definitely a good idea. I remember being up in the upper for that Coastal game one year. I don't remember if it was the 2013 game. They won 70 to something.
It wasn't that one.
It was a different Coastal game. But it was literally
Carolina opened with Coastal, I think.
That's right.
Yeah.
So when you would walk around or you would just be Dr. Number 5 report to Dr. It was constant because people were just falling out.
Yeah.
It was so hot and humid.
Well, Columbia is the hottest place on earth. I knew that before I came here.
Yeah. The combination of heat and humidity.
I sat in West Upper for that game. And I'm not a complain about the heat person, but I was complaining about the heat. It was brutal.
Yeah.
Absolute. People around us were leaving. I mean, they were leaving. There were people that don't leave early, and they were leaving early because they're just this is unbearable.
You can't enjoy what you're watching in front of you because you're sweltering.
Yeah.
So anything to potentially alleviate that to any degree would be welcome.
Yes.
Yeah.
Think outside the box. There's got to be some options.
Yeah, and I think, and this is not something that everybody's going to have access to. So I think when people think about this as people, again, with the means to do it, or if you're just kind of thinking from a revenue standpoint, the boxes, upgrading those, creating more premium seating. There was a time where South Carolina was well behind almost everybody in the SEC, if not everybody, in the premium seating department. And they do have more. They upgraded that with the loge seating, et cetera, reworked some things. But there's probably room to continue going up from there because that's the direction watching sports is going in, ultimately.
Well, we'll see if they let us on the renovation crew to implement some of these ideas. Appreciate everybody weighing in on the Firehouse Subs text line. That'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show with myself, Terry Ford, up next here on The Game.